been looking at Paul's letters to Timothy the last few weeks. The last 2 Sundays, we looked at Paul's warning in 1 Timothy. He said, beware of false teachers. He emphasized the importance of the true teachings of Jesus that are found in Scripture. We talked about how God desires unity and solidarity among believers, and the only way to have that really is to be centered on the truth. He said, if you get caught off in this stuff, we're not together. And then last week we read that Paul said about elders and deacons. He talked about the leadership and ministry that we are all called to take part in. And we looked at the standard that Paul set for leaders to live up to. Remember that list of things? And he looked at some of the things that were meant for our lives and our homes even. Then we united to celebrate communion last week. Today we're going to advance into 2 Timothy. It's a different letter that Paul wrote to Timothy. It's believed to be the last bit of Scripture that Paul actually wrote. Paul, you may know, was imprisoned multiple times in his ministry. And this first time in prison, he lived in this rented house. It was basically like house arrest. But this second time, he's essentially in a dungeon. He is imprisoned, and he recognizes that his life is coming to its end. He's older now. He's less healthy, and he sees these are the last days. So he's locked up and he's frail, and he wanted to do something meaningful instead of just sit there. And so he decided to write again to Timothy. So I'm going to read to you, really just to start, just 2 verses here from 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 13 and 14. He wrote, "Hold on to the pattern of wholesome teaching that you learned from me, a pattern shaped by the faith and love that you have in Christ Jesus. Through the power of the Holy Spirit who lives within us, carefully guard the precious truth that has been entrusted to you." So he's writing about truth. He's right back in it. This is a second letter. But he used that word guard, carefully guard the precious truth. He uses that word 5 times in the 2 letters that he wrote to Timothy. 4 of the times he's talking to us about guarding the message of the gospel, which is what he's doing here, guard the truth. The 5th time, though, he talks about the way that God has been in action to guard him in his own life and his work. We need to let that 5th use inform us how we think Paul meant the first 4, okay? God called and guided Paul to do his work as a missionary. We know that. He's the most prolific missionary in history. He gifted Paul with the ability to reach people and plant churches in nations. I mean, nation upon nation. He had this amazing ability. But I told you, Paul's in prison for the 2nd time. He was attacked. He was beaten. He was shipwrecked probably at least 4 times. That he's on a boat at sea, at storm, and the boat crashes. He did not have an easy life at all. The guarding that God did of Paul guarded his life, and it guarded his spirit from becoming defeated, but it did not give him a smooth ride. Paul suffered for Christ. Okay? And his spirit stayed high. It's amazing because, especially at the end of his life, I said he's in this dungeon, probably beginning to recognize defeat. And he said, rather than sit here and accept it, I'm going to write a letter of encouragement to Timothy. His spirit had been guarded by God, while his life, with the exception of not dying, kind of wasn't that guarded. So as he writes to Timothy and tells him to guard the message of the gospel, he's not telling him to keep it safe and clean. He isn't saying to never let the church get dirty. He's saying to honor it and not let others destroy it. But he had no intention of staying out of trouble. He says, guard the gospel, but he means take it someplace risky, but hold it tight. Do you hear that? He's by using the same word to describe how we should treat the gospel and how God protected him, he's challenging us to go with the gospel into places that make us uncomfortable. He's reminding us that God takes care of his people, and we can have faith when things get rough. It's not my notes. We don't have time for it, but I'm going to tell you this. I hear people, especially when I talk to them about what happened to me when I had cancer, a lot of people, and God healed me from cancer. It's in my medical report, but then other people say, well, what about my so-and-so who didn't get healed? And what was there? Or people that have a prolonged cancer that they live with for a long time, sometimes decades. Well, why hasn't God healed me of this? And Paul could write the same thing. Why, if I'm doing the Lord's work, why do these ships keep wrecking? Why do these governments keep arresting me? Why do these people keep hitting me? And the only thing that I can come to is that if God hasn't healed your cancer, if God hasn't protected your ship, it's because God knows that what He is calling you to is not affected by the cancer or the shipwreck. It's not stopped. We might feel like everything we've been headed towards has been completely detoured, and now we're awash, we're a waste, we're out of the way. But if God meant for you to be somewhere, He would have gotten you there. And if He allowed you to be here, it's where He wanted you, or it's just where He knew you could also be and be effective. God won't let cancer stop you from doing what He has called you to do that you have said yes to. He won't let that happen. But He might let cancer shape how you say yes and how you follow. But if cancer is a roadblock, God will bust through the roadblock. So back to this. Paul has encouraged us to be bold and fearless when we face mighty opponents. He would tell us to not fear a government who opposes us. He would tell us to not shrink back when groups of people hate us. He would. Be bold and strong. And yet, He does tell us to worry about something. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, I'm going to read verses 10 through 19. 2 Timothy 2, 10 through 19. Paul says, and this is right in the middle of a paragraph, he starts off, "So I'm willing to endure anything if it will bring salvation and eternal glory in Christ Jesus to those God has chosen." Then he says, this is a trustworthy saying. "If we die with Him, we will also live with Him. If we endure hardship, we will reign with Him. If we deny Him, He will deny us. If we are unfaithful, He remains faithful, for He cannot deny who He is." Then he says, "Remind everyone about these things and command them in God's presence to stop fighting over words. Such arguments are useless and they can ruin those who hear them. Work hard so you can present yourself to God and receive His approval. Be a good worker, one who does not need to be ashamed and who correctly explains the word of truth. Avoid worthless, foolish talk that only leads to more godless behavior. This kind of talk spreads like cancer, as in the case of Hymenaeus and Philetus. They've left the path of truth, claiming that the resurrection of the dead has already occurred. In this way, they have turned some people away from the faith. But God's truth stands firm like a foundation stone, with this inscription: the Lord knows those who are His, and all who belong to the Lord must turn away from evil." He said, don't be afraid of governments. Don't be afraid of people that disagree or even attack. In fact, down in verse 23, he says, "Again, I say, don't get involved in foolish, ignorant arguments that only starts fights." He says to be bold against enemies, but we need to be cautious with our lips amongst ourselves. Some of the most common criticisms of the church today is that they're full of cliques. The church is just a bunch of groups, these little groups of people, factions really, who have sectioned themselves off from other believers and for whatever reason. And you could argue that a lot of the denominations in the country are that. They decide, well, I believe this a little bit different than you. I've made this the sticking point, and we need to separate. But they happen inside individual churches, too. Just, well, we sit over here because of this. We all like so-and-so. They like so-and-so. Whatever happens. And those kind of issues turn people off when they're seeking to know Jesus. So I have to ask the question, not because I want to for us today, but because Paul has raised the issue. Are there any points of disunity in our church? In our church that makes outsiders not want to be a part of this fellowship? And if you think there may be, in fact, if you know there is, if there's disunity with you, the gospel calls us to mend those relationships. Probably because the end result is more important than the thing that got in the way. For the sake of the unbelievers, swallow your pride. Maybe even admit that you may have been wrong. And let us be the united church Paul's been writing about, that God has called us to be. The metaphor that I like fits with this message is weeding. Weeds appear in every garden unless you intentionally keep them out and intentionally look for them and pull them out. Gardening is a task for the diligent, the persistent, and the committed. If you really want to get the right kind of garden with the right kind of plants growing and blooming, then we must weed out the bad as well as nourish the good things that we want to stay. One of the ways we do that is by ministering in our community as much or more than we minister here in our church. So this morning we've had a special guest who's going to come and share a ministry that is happening out there and how we can be a part of it. So I want to introduce and invite Linda Dankert. She's the executive director of Heartbeat of Columbiana County, and she's going to share with us what they do and how we can be a part.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Pastor. Good morning, everybody. I feel so honored to be here. Just a little bit of a testimony for the morning. We've had a loss in our family in the past 2 weeks, and at the funeral, my mother fell ill, and we found out that she's terminal. And so it's been a really, really hard week. And I have to be honest. Poor Jeremy, poor Pastor. I didn't text him or email him back to confirm that I would be here in a timely fashion. I'm sure that was stressful, but I was actually feeling selfishly like I just wanted to be in my home church this morning. And so when I'm sitting here and I'm worshiping with you all and I'm hearing the pastor speak, it's just very real that the church is the church. And I am just as at home here with all of you as I would be in my home church. And I'm just as comforted by the praise that you guys lifted up and the message that your pastor has had. So thank you very much for welcoming me here today. I appreciate it. You, just by doing that, you are doing God's work. Thank you. So, like Pastor said, I am the executive director of Heartbeat in East Liverpool. At Heartbeat, our mission is to empower women to choose life for their unborn babies in every situation. So, we know that the first step to that, we have learned that the first step to that is to help her to see that her own life has value. And it's not until she can understand that she can start to believe that the life that she carries has value. And we serve these women with dignity and respect. We serve them regardless of their circumstances, because we value each life, the born and the unborn lives, because each life is created in the image of God with unique purpose, with a perfect plan, and infinite worth. And God sees that, so we must see that, regardless of their circumstances. We've been serving women and families in this area for 30 years in Columbiana County, in Hancock County, and in Beaver County, Pennsylvania. We essentially meet the mission of empowering women to choose life by doing 4 things. We have our main priority, our heart, if you will, is in Ava Women's Center, which is our medical facility. It's at Ava that we provide women with the very first glimpse of the life that's growing inside them through ultrasound technology. We educate her on her options in this loving, respectful, confidential, non-manipulative way. because we know that women don't choose abortion because they think it's a good idea. They choose abortion because they feel that they have no better choice. They feel it's the only option that they have. And that's hard for us to wrap our head around sometimes when we're not in the situation that they're in. The reality is that when a woman comes to us with an unexpected pregnancy, she feels like her whole world has been turned on end. The things that seemed reasonable yesterday are no longer reasonable today. And the things that seemed completely out of the question yesterday are suddenly feeling like your only option. So we talked to her about the options that are available to her, the options of carrying her baby to term and using parenting or making an adoption plan. We connect her then with the resources that she needs to live out that choice well, the medical care, the financial assistance, housing, counseling, the list goes on, depending on her circumstances. Each woman's case is completely unique. But at Eva, each woman finds a place of safety. When she found out that she was pregnant, the last thing she felt was safe. Typically, she has a lot of people in her life, and she has a lot of expectations of her own life that suddenly feel turned on end. And she feels a lot of pressure from her own expectations and from the people around her. So at Eva, it's a refuge for her. It's a place where she can take the time to let the reality of her situation settle in. There is no reset button where she can go back to a point when she was not pregnant, when this pregnancy, this baby didn't exist. From this point forward, she will either choose life or death. And she has to come to terms with that reality, because right now she's seeking a way to just go back to the beginning before the pregnancy happened. So we give her an opportunity to just get used to this new reality. She can think through her options without feeling coerced. And all of her services are free. We don't benefit financially from any decision that she makes. And Eva is the only place that she isn't feeling manipulated as she makes these life and death decisions. What we found is that when a woman is treated with grace and love, when she's given truth in time to think, she will almost always choose life. It's a beautiful plan, and it works. And we're doing it right across the river at Ava. So the first thing we do as Heartbeat is Ava Women's Center. The second thing that we do is the Cornerstone Parenting Center. When a woman chooses life for her baby, she needs some very practical support. If she's considering an adoption plan, we help her to connect with a reputable agency. We work with 2 different ones. And then we help her in the interim until she makes that solid connection with an adoption agency. We help her with her medical care, her housing. We help her to make sure that she's eating healthy food, taking care of herself. And we educate her on how to care for her body while she's pregnant, how to care for that new life that's developing. And when she connects with the adoption agency just picks up right where we left off, and they continue her care for her. If she chooses to parent, we connect her up with a seasoned mom who knows the ropes. They start to build a relationship, and they step together through the process of preparing for the baby. She goes through parenting classes, and she earns, by going through the classes, she earns points that she can use to purchase things from the baby boutique. She can get everything at the baby boutique, from diapers to clothes to car seats to formula, anything that she needs. We either have it in the baby boutique or God provides in some beautiful way. It happens over and over again. So we have Ava Women's Center, we have the Cornerstone Parenting Center, and the third thing that we do is to tenderly and lovingly help women who have chosen abortion to find healing through the power of Jesus. We have a confidential, very grace-filled ministry called Freedom and Surrender. Because the truth is that the fallout from abortion is epidemic in our country. 1 in 3 women in the United States have chosen abortion at some point in their life. And that number is not different between churched and unchurched people. 1 in 3. Most women and the men who fathered the babies and supported the abortion silently suffer with guilt and shame, holding on to that secret. Some of them are determined to carry that secret to the grave. And often they find themselves struggling with things like depression and suicidal thoughts and broken relationships and divorce, addiction, anger. But they don't connect those struggles with their past abortion. Many men and women are finding healing when they surrender that secret and process through their thoughts and their feelings in a healthy way. When they let the Lord apply the blood and his forgiveness to cover that abortion once and for all. Some people, even people in the church, believe that abortion is the one sin that the cross does not cover. And it is not. And the women who have chosen abortion need our grace. They need to see Jesus' grace reflected in us. And that's what we do through Freedom and Surrender. So we have Ava, Cornerstone, Freedom and Surrender. And the fourth thing that we do is educate young people about healthy relationships, about God's intentions for their sexuality, and about development of a baby inside their mother's womb. Right now, the culture is screaming at young people, screaming at all of us, that a baby in the womb is not a life until it's born. The culture is screaming at our young people lies about their sexuality and their worth in God's eyes. And we try to counter that through a curriculum that we call In the Know. And we take it to schools, middle school, high school, youth groups. Our culture is loud in their ears. And we need to speak louder. And that's part of what we're trying to do through In the Know. It's interesting because at one point, whenever Roe versus Wade, when the Supreme Court decision was made that legalized abortion at essentially all points of development of a baby, when it went through in 1973, the scientific evidence wasn't there. We couldn't see into the womb to see what development looks like. But now, science agrees with the Bible that something extraordinary happens at the moment of conception when a unique set of DNA is created as the beginning of a unique human being that is not a surprise to the Lord. He is not surprised by any new life because he creates every new life. And then we have to work to get our minds thinking the way he thinks, to see life the way he sees life. And then we need to be a voice dispelling the lies that our culture is pushing on our young people. So that's who we are. Heartbeat is Ava Women's Center, Cornerstone Parenting Center, Freedom and Surrender, and In the Know. All of this is directed toward protecting the lives of unborn babies by meeting women right where they are, sharing the love of Jesus, one life at a time. There are a lot of fronts to the pro-life movement. In this battle, there's the political realm and the media. But our part of the battle is one-on-one, one mom, one baby at a time. The exciting thing is that God is doing amazing things at Heartbeat, and he has been for quite some time. We've been around for 30-some years, and the numbers are there to prove it. Babies are being saved. Moms are being changed. Moms are being saved for eternity. It's a beautiful thing to see. The people that work at Heartbeat call it their happy place because we see God moving at every turn. And anytime we start to despair because of the enemy that is so dark and so big, he reminds us that he who is in us is greater than he who is in the world. So, first and most importantly, the way that you can help us, because Pastor Jeremy said that you would like to know how you can help. We need your fervent prayer, nonstop fervent prayer. Everything that we do is standing on the foundation of prayer. This battle to protect the unborn is real, and it begins and ends in the heavenlies, where our greatest weapon is prayer. We'd love to have you visit Heartbeat. I know it's easier to pray for the things that we know about, and if you can see our facility and you can see our staff, it'll be much easier to pray. And gosh, we would love to have you come and pray on site. That would be a beautiful gift to us. Second, we need your financial support. We provide all of our services free of charge so that money is never going to get in the way of a choice for life. But it is really costly to run a medical clinic. We have a beautifully equipped facility that's staffed by experienced and well-trained medical professionals. We'd really like to be open 5 days a week with staff on hand to provide same-day appointments and be able to serve walk-in clients. We're working toward that goal, but we need additional funding to cover their payroll costs. It's just real, the reality of living in this world and serving in this world. We also have a very comprehensive marketing strategy to compete with the abortion industry. When a woman is looking for help, typically through a Google search, she needs to see us first before she sees an abortion clinic. And it's expensive to compete with the huge budgets of the abortion industry. God is providing, but it's still expensive. There are days when I have no idea how that is going to be funded. But he provides at every turn, and maybe he's asking you to be part of the way he's going to provide. If God's calling you to support us financially, you can donate online or send a check, or we do have lots of churches who join their monies together and support us that way. You can also participate in our Walk for Life, the second Saturday in October, or our Vision Banquet, which happens in April. There are 2 major fundraising events that we have each year. You can create awareness by talking to your family and your friends about us and getting them involved too. So Pastor Jeremy said something that I thought is just so applicable. Guard the gospel, but take it into someplace risky. So the next request that I have for you is just that. It's not safe. It's not. But to volunteer, to join us on the front line, is your opportunity to take the gospel into someplace risky. It's touching messy lives. It's becoming a warrior on the front line of a battle that Satan hates. Right now, we're looking for seasoned moms. You don't have to be a perfect mom. You just have to have been down the road to join our team at Cornerstone. We have a waiting list of moms who are waiting for a seasoned mom to come alongside them and show them the ropes. We give you training. It's not hard. Your experience is your teacher. Even if you feel like you didn't do well, you learned. And you can teach a lot to somebody, especially some of the women that we have. They come from families where they have a generational legacy of poor parenting or no parenting. And the influence that you can have is significant. You could affect generations to come just by coming alongside one woman at a time. We are also in need of another ultrasound tech at Ava. Now, we try to pay all of our medical staff because we're trying to compete with the jobs that are out there, and it's tough. It seems unfair that Planned Parenthood pays top dollar to their medical staff. It's very lucrative to work there, but somebody who has a heart for life is asked to volunteer their time and their services, and I would love to see God's people step up and pay these professionals what they're worth to do the same work, better work, using the similar skills. We also need a housekeeper right now, somebody just to come in and do light housekeeping, and a handyman. We always have handyman tasks to do, and nobody to hammer, the nail in or repair the board or whatever it might be. Our board of directors is looking for the right person with accounting and fundraising savvy to advise us as we grow to meet the needs of women and families in this area. I believe that this battle sits right in the middle of the heart of God. It's at the core of who He is. He's the lover of life. And I believe that He wants His church to have the same heart and to fully engage in this battle. Each of us, because we're followers of Jesus Christ, needs to hear His call and stand in the gap for the widow and the orphan. And who is more of a widow than a woman who is so desperate that she's considering aborting her child? And who's more of an orphan than a helpless unborn child whose life is at risk? So will you stand with me? Will you stand with heartbeat? Will you stand in the battle for life right here in your community? Will you be bold and fearless? I thank you for letting me visit with you today and letting me share the heart of Heartbeat. I'll be at the table out in the vestibule whenever service is over. So please stop by and say hi. I'd love to meet you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, yeah, Linda, thank you. Three things. Thank you for what you've shared with us. The invitation to participate in the knowledge about what's happening. Thank you for doing it. She's been serving our county for a while. They've been helping here do things that we care about, that we talk about. I hear in our conversations, you all know this is a topic that matters to us, that here is a tangible person. She's on the front line, and she's invited us to participate with her. That's great, thank you. But thank you for coming today, letting yourself be at church at our church when you needed to be in church today. So thank you for that. Would you please, I want us to commit to praying for Heartbeat as she asked us to, but let's also remember to pray for Linda and her family as they struggle in this time. We're going to add you to our prayer list, your family, and we're going to lift you up continually. All right. Well, the band's going to play a song, but we're ready for our benediction. We've been in church today. So will you please stand and receive this blessing?